Joining us with reaction, the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, Treason, former Speaker of the House, Fox News contributor, Newt Gingrich. I was angrier than I want to really admit publicly earlier today. I'm not as angry now. Now I see an opportunity, and I sense that they're not going to make this mistake again. Please tell me they won't do this again this way.
Well, first of all, you have no idea whether or not they'll make that mistake or invent a new mistake. What you do know is that I'm just being honest. What you do know is that Donald Trump is a very smart guy. That he just went through an experience that wasn't what he was told. He had been told that everything was under control, the leadership could deliver, he didn't have to pay too much attention, come in at the very end and close the deal, and it got to be a total mess. Now, I'll guarantee you, if this had been one of his hotels, one of his buildings, one of his golf courses, there'd be a lot of personnel changes tonight. And I think what you're going to see is that he is going to rethink how he approaches the Congress based on this outcome, because it was so totally, utterly unacceptable. At the same time, I think Paul Ryan's at a real turning point. Ryan's a very smart guy. Nobody should take that away from him. And he knows an immense amount about policy. But he's got to decide, in the world of Trump, where you're doing really bold, really different things, is he willing to spend the time and the energy listening to everybody, even when he doesn't agree with them, doesn't think they make any sense? Because only by, we used to use a model of listen, learn, help, and lead. And only by doing this, and you've talked about it some, only by getting everybody in the dialogue, do you have a chance of ultimately getting to a majority. And I think this was an example that starting at the top, trying to run it through the system, is not going to work. It didn't work for Boehner, and I don't think it's going to work for Ryan. And so they're going to have to find some new approaches to go back and get these things done.
Okay, let me ask you if you would like this approach. If you brought, like, for example, Reagan relied heavily, and by the way, so did you, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, you did a lot of research of renewing American civilization. You have a great relationship with a lot of these really smart think tanks like the Heritage Foundation. If I was going to start over today, what I would do is I would task Secretary Price. I would have him consult with all of these different think tanks. I would have him consult with the moderates. I would have him consult with pro-life people. I'd have him consult with the Freedom Caucus. I'd have him consult with the study group, and so on and so forth. And then you're the one that uses the analogy, although you got mad at me on TV one night, about the square. And you build within the square what everybody's wish list is, and then you start telling people what's doable and what's not doable, what's contradictory, what's not contradictory. Thoughts?
Well, no, wait a second. First of all, for the audience's sake, I did not get mad at you. I tried to point out to you.
You dressed me down on national television. What are you talking about?
Sean, after all these years, you're way too sensitive. I suggested that maybe you didn't quite get it, but here, look, here's the deal. I think that when you remember the two things here. Health is life and death for every American, for their children, for their parents, every American. And it is almost 1 out of every $5 in the economy. Now, if you're going to start moving something that scale, I think you ought to do it out in the open. I think the more information you get, the more people who participate. You have this doctor in Wichita, for example. He'd never make it through a Harvard, Yale, Brookings Institution study group, but probably they ought to bring him in and give him time in an open public hearing to explain how his model works. I mean, I can tell you that the Sanford Health System in North and South Dakota is a miraculously effective system. Gunderson Lutheran in western Wisconsin is an amazingly successful system. We ought to be looking for glimmerings that tell us, you know, there's a dramatically better future out here, and if we get the right legislation and we do it the right way, we can give every American a better future. And now that requires, I think, a totally different approach than the one they tried in the first 2 months.